Greetings everyone, Mr. Deep here. I had my introductory video last week. As I mentioned, this is a channel that has been on my heart for several years after this kind of personal experience of awakening that I've had. And I gave my personal story, and now it's video number 2. And this one we're going to get more into the meat of the sandwich, you could say. Now, I'm basically going to reference Moraviev. Moraviev is a Russian, I don't like the word mystic, but he is a Russian man who understands the Gnosis, the spiritual science behind the awakening process, and he references his work from a very ancient understanding of this, and surprisingly, he calls it Christianity. He actually says it's the original Christianity, not the one that is very popular today. So I will reference, not because I'm his disciple or because I'm a Christian, but because of the accuracy. Because what happened for me was when I was going through this waking up process and all of the challenges that I was facing, I didn't find anything in the common literature that could help me on this. And it was, I managed to stumble across a thing called fringe knowledge. That's sort of the common name for it. And it sort of saved my life and saved my sanity because I was on the edge. I understand now in a way because I now see as I fulfill my purpose here on earth, I understand those challenges. I understand the danger I represented to the principles or forces at work that keep a man asleep on this planet. So it all makes sense now. But back to Moraviev. Now, the reason why I'm going to reference a lot of his work is because after having this awakening and after sort of crossing the river, so to speak, or even being saved, but not in the Christian meaning of that word, I was blown away because he articulated to a T what had happened to me in the previous year, couple of years. And that just fascinated me. I'm like, dude, this has some substance, and he's saying it's ancient. It used to be taught in the mystery schools, the good ones. So I'm like, dude, there's something in this because it is bang on. I've not met him, he's not met me, and he's articulated to a T what I just went through. And of course, this channel is all about getting back to the truth. We live in a reality that can be defined as a counterfeiting reality. In other words, everything that's true and organic is counterfeited immediately. And that includes the true awakening process, and that's why I speak, and that's why my Father in heaven has called me to do this series. So the first thing I want to talk about is, I guess what you call is possession. So what I mean by possession is, well, let me take a step back. What Moraviev would say is that we are always influenced by unseen forces. And until a man is aware of those unseen forces and transcends them, he has no autonomy and he has no free will, and he's certainly not awake. And basically, if you don't mind, I got my coffee here. It keeps me, awake. It's a bit hot, so that's good. I'm not missing anything there. So basically, what he talks about is essentially that, he talks about, and he references the Bible as man as legion. In other words, man is possessed by 1,000 forces that he doesn't have any control over. So basically, to define awakening is to actually perceive those forces and to transcend them. In other words, overcome them. In other words, not be governed by them. And when one does that successfully, you actually enter under another cosmic spiritual jurisdiction. Now what that means is that you are no longer governed by what he calls the general law. The general law is basically that principle in our reality that keeps a man asleep. When you enter this new jurisdiction after incredible hard work, after incredible study, overcoming incredible challenges, purifying the heart, healing your trauma, balancing your centers without giving your sovereignty away to the so-called chakra gods. Where was I? So basically, maybe I need a bit more coffee. So basically, let's get back to this topic of possession. So what I would say to you is, we've seen the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. That terrified me, by the way, and I couldn't sleep without a light or a TV on for several months after that. I'm not joking, that really is what happened. But what I've kind of realized is that possession is the norm. Maybe not with people crawling on on the ceiling, but everyone's possessed until they realize and become aware of the forces that are lurking. And I would go further. I mean, I'm a big fan of Carl Jung, and you know, a man with soul. I mean, he rescued psychology from Freud. Freud was a very ambitious man, a very arrogant man, and just, you know, plucked theories out of thin air, which really had no substance, and that's why they divided. And it was very hard for Jung because he had a lot of respect for Freud. But when fundamentally, dude, I'm gone. You're out of line. You're not backing this stuff up. You just want to believe what you want to believe. Firstly, I can't claim that I understand everything about Jung's work, but what I can understand, he's my man. Thank you, universe, for bringing him here. It's so funny though, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to sidetrack here. In 2013, I wanted to study, and I went and studied psychology, and obviously inspired by the Jungian aspects and the soulful aspects, and even things like transpersonal psychology, which had to do with theories about how our consciousness evolved throughout time. And anyway, the university degree had made absolutely sure to remove any ounce of soul and spirit and even meaning in a spiritual or philosophical sense. And if you know anything about Jung, I think it was about that, you know? And so basically, I did I basically left the degree because it was awful. But what I'm trying to say is, you got Freud and you got, thank God we had Jung. But if you go and try and do it at university, they will stuff this stuff down your throat to the point where you just hate. You don't want to touch psychology. And then if you're a good boy for 3-4 years, they might let you do social psychology. They might let you start to enter, but hopefully by then they've run you so far into the ground, you'll be a nice little lab technician. Or one of the most popular jobs in the world, I might add, is what they call it, industrial rehabilitation. So the biggest growing job is, I'm not happy in my job. Don't worry, we've got all of these trained psychologists that are going to help you feel really good about being in your job again. I've digressed a bit. But what I'm trying to say about Jung is, as much as I love his work, he talked about the unconscious, and if you look into psychotherapy, if you ever had good quality psychotherapy, you'll understand it's about we're the tip of the iceberg. Very arrogant, but not meaning to be. We've got all this pain buried so far down from our childhood that we've got no access, so we think the tip of the iceberg is us. The psychotherapy, when it's good and when our hearts are right and we do it consistently, allows us to tap into unconscious reasons why we do what we do. So all good so far. What I add to this though is that within that realm of unconsciousness lies, I don't know what the right word is, but it is not benign. It is not just this unconsciousness space. Now, what it is exactly, I have to be careful how to define it. Look, one way of saying it is that, and there's a lot of literature on this, but within that unconsciousness, there seems to be an agenda. There seems to be forces at work, and this is where all of the spiritual talk of this stuff comes from, is that within that unconsciousness, there seems to be a game and players that we can't perceive with our senses that are hell-bent on keeping that unconscious, almost like they benefit from it. I don't know if I should say much more than that, but I'm just trying to add this principle. It ain't benign. The reason I say this is because what allowed me to wake up all the way in an authentic, genuine sense was only from the day when I realized I'm being fucked with. When I realized whether it's a being or a non-physical being, or simply the program of this reality that has been programmed in a very oppressive way in terms of our soul truly awakening. Just give me one sec. Yeah, so I've actually lost my train of thought. I've been up for quite a few hours this morning. Actually, to be honest, I'm a music producer, and I've just spent the last 5 hours doing videos for that, where I won't get into that, but yeah, I've just been doing that. So basically what I'm saying is that there is principles in this reality that seem to gain from our unconsciousness. It's almost like, and I don't know if you know about this, but there's been many reference in ancient literature and even certain individuals recently in the last 100 years that have talked about, they call it louche. In other words, there's a suggestion that we're not top of the food chain, that on a non-physical sense, we are actually food for the so-called gods. Now, I'm not talking about the one that really loves us, in which we carry the same genetic code in a micro-macro sense, but we are in a sort of farm. And the louche is basically the energy is siphoned off us, and we need, the drama is part of the farm conditions that need to be set, because we need to keep producing this for those. And there's further ideas. The other idea is that there's beings in the non-physical that have made choices to remove so far from the source that the only way to access light is through us, ignorant, silly people. I'm not saying we're terrible people, but one thing we are is our biggest sin is our ignorance. I'll say that much. So, as you can see, I love Jung, but I'm also adding on to this because that was the only way I was able to understand what was going on for me. And that was the only way, what helped me to wake up was the idea that I'm being violated, that I'm being raped on a spiritual, emotional level, and that is war for me. And it was only realizing, because you've got so many people, right, because they're not aware of the unconscious forces manipulating them, that they believe things like, oh, it's my weakness, and I just don't seem to be able to master that. Now, I'm not saying there is truth in that, and you need to be disciplined. But when one truly perceives in their bones, in a gnosis, not in a head sense, but in an experiential way, that they're being messed with, this was the motivation and the key that got me all the way to the other side. And so that's why I mention it. Now, getting back to this unconsciousness, spirit possession, or however you like to define that, I regard as the absolute norm across the planet. I agree with Moraviev. No one has a true will. They're automatons until they wake up. They have an imagined will. And basically what Moraviev talks about is, and I hope I remember it all. So what he talks about is, I guess you could say, influences. I've just talked about influences, and one of those influences, and I think he calls this influence to keep us locked in a certain frequency as food for the gods, whatever you want to call it. He calls this an A influence. And so these A influences often come as a shock to us, but the shock is designed to keep us in prison, right? Then he talks about a B influence. The B influence is a shock. It's another whack. But if appropriately grasped on a deeper level, it can start to help you move forwards in your awakening. And so you have this A and B. And there's a lot of people that it's just all A, B, left the building decades ago, right? But then you do have individuals, especially in the kind of rather bizarre time we're living in, that are getting the A and the B. Now, just to talk a little on a B influence could be a shock that comes to you. It could be a break in a relationship. It could be it could be something so shocking to you. And because of your heart and your desire to really understand what's going on, you find yourself in a year going, you know what? That B influence, even though you might call it that, loved me. It hurt, but it loved me. It was like Brussels sprouts, you know? You don't always like the taste, but they're good for you. And basically, as one who was being dominated by the A influences starts to, and I gave you that example, that B influence, goodness, it really didn't feel nice. But because I've done the work and the reflection, I can see it's good. There's something good in there. And then you've got this battle, because the A one that's going to come in and go, oh, hey, come back here, you know, come back here. But what happens is that with sufficient attention and developing relationship with the B and the author of the B influences, what begins to happen is what Moraviev calls, and look, these are just words, but he says that our magnetic center, which is locked to the A, with sufficient turning and response, a healthy response to the B influences, our magnetic center starts to turn away from the A influences. And this is when the path to awakening basically begins. And that, followed to the nth degree, leads a man to overcome the world. Okay, now we've talked about the A and B influences, because some of this kind of is concurrent. These things are happening at the same time in different ways as the man is rebuilding or reforming or becoming embodied or awakening. And the other aspect of this, I want to sort of touch on the centers and also the idea of the self. And essentially, and this is one thing Moravia gets deep into, and even I wish I could grasp. I mean, it's very tripped out. I can't claim to grasp all these shares, but what I do grasp is quite mind-blowing. And what he talks about is the centers that we have. You may call them chakras, but I guess based on his definition, it may not fit in terms of numbers and possibly function as well. But essentially, he talks about the centers and how they tend to be corrupted in a man that's unconscious and essentially possessed by unseen forces, but imagining he has a free will. And but as in my last video, I did talk quite a bit about the heart center. And with the heart center, one, it must be healed. And what that means is that you've got zero chance of ever awakening if you have not healed your trauma. I don't care if you like that or not. It is a fact, and it will never change. It is an eternal fact. Most people on this planet, they're not aware, unfortunately, that they're carrying trauma, and they automatically choose spiritual pathways and gods and all of these types of things that is a distortion, because it's impossible to choose in its purity what is best for your soul evolution when you've got a damaged heart center or an unhealed heart center. The next step is to then purify. And I do make that distinction because, as I said, when I was a Christian, it's all very well to go and forgive, this idea of forgive someone, but when the pain is running so deep you have no access and you think that person down there, you've actually got an okay relationship with. I'm not saying like tear apart these relationships, I'm just saying we can carry such incredible pain, and it's really an insult to us to imagine that, oh, I forgive you. It's so dumb, because we're just a million miles away from what that pain really is and the work that's required to fully heal it. So I'm going to say that first off. If you're trying to entertain the spiritual or awakening and this is not healed, you're wasting your time. I have no compromise on this. I'm sorry, because not only is it true, it's probably the number one thing that blocks people. You know, and I see it time and time again. Oh, I'm doing my ayahuasca now, and you know, I've had these spiritual groups been very hostile to me. I've been up in Rishikesh and all these different places, and I just see the same thing again. The other thing I do see when I was up in Rishikesh is you've got all of these people that have, you know, what's the word? Let go of their Western religion and their Western gods, only to feel very uncomfortable with not having something or someone to worship. And this is going to be in another video, but when you understand in a deep way that when you worship, you cannot awaken. Yeah, I just said that. When you worship, you cannot awaken. And the true divine spirit that loves us, of which we're a micro of a macro, would never, ever require worship. Only a lesser God and an ignorant man would enjoy such a dance. So I just want to sort of share that. So back to the heart center. With these things taking place, the awareness that there are forces going on within our inner life and even external to us that are conspiring to keep us locked down in a certain frequency, as we become aware of these things and we genuinely take the hits, the shocks that come from the B influence, and we start to realize this is a love influence, as all these things take place, and as I said, the magnetic center starts to turn, you start to get some movement in your being, in the senses of your being, and with the heart. And this is a very interesting one. One thing I discovered as I was getting more advanced on this journey that I'm discussing was my sexual craving, you could say, reduced. Now, I'm not a monk, right? And I'd like to meet a girl one day, but we'll see. But what I really noticed was, I thought, wow, and I kind of like it. I like not being so, oh God, I've got to meet a girl tonight. It's been 2 years, or whatever it's been. Actually, it's been longer for me at other times, but that's, you probably don't need to know that. And what was very interesting, because this wasn't, I read something and believed it, I noticed this changing within me. And then I remembered Moraviev's work. And it didn't click at the time, but when I read Moraviev's work, the function of the sexual center is dual. One is obviously the reproduction, the procreation, and the sexual, which covers the whole function for 99.99999% of the planet, right? But when one sufficiently and correctly evolves, this higher function of the sexual center is actually opening up the higher centers that we didn't have privy to. Because one can only access the higher centers with this A, B moving to the B influence, getting more honest with ourselves, and I'll try to remember to talk more about that. And it was just what I call a revelation. This is why one doesn't, when one's believing in a doctrine and all of that, that's great, that's for children, that's for people of a certain level of development. But when you're getting direct revelation because you're doing the sufficient work, people can believe what they like about what their life is, and they can believe what they like about what your life is. But you know, G-N-O-W, G-N-O-S-I-S, you know. That is a higher knowing. K-N-O-W is, again, it's a toy for children up to a certain age in a spiritual sense. And now if you're smart, you probably would have thought, oh, Tantra. Again, because we live in a reality that by definition is counterfeiting. In other words, at every moment, it's deliberately trying us to pull away from. The moment the real pops up, the counterfeit just tries to smother it. That's just a principle of reality, and I don't know if you perceive that, but I hope you do perceive that one day. So basically, I wouldn't touch with a barge pole almost all of this tantric because it's really dark. It's pretending to activate the higher centers, but I can guarantee that the energy that is being harvested there by forces that are not visible, it is what's the word? A frenzy, a feeding frenzy. And most of these spiritual groups, these spiritual retreats, are none other than a feeding frenzy for imposter gods. But maybe I'll talk more about that in another video. But what I'm trying to say is, I know it's a bit complex, and I'm not here to wake you up, right? This will be able to touch that deeper, higher part of you, even if it hasn't emerged yet. This information is for that part of you. And depending on your development, will the amount of resonance on a level that is beyond the canoeing, and I can't, that's not my job, but I can't tell you ins and outs of that. I just need to say what I need to say, and if there is an ability for the gnosis within me to touch the gnosis in you, then that's wonderful, and I'm very happy that this could pass through me to you, and well done, because you've obviously done some work. So what can happen is if you can get a picture of all of this going on, all of this unconsciousness, gee, I'm being messed around with. Oh, this is a shock and it keeps me locked. This shock, I hated it, but it's actually good for me. I'm going to try to build a relationship with that. So as all of this stuff's going on, and as I said, as you heal the heart, as you get more honest with yourself, that is key. That is key. And I always remember, people like to think, honest, yeah, I'm honest, I always speak my mind, I'm a real honest guy. And I don't have it with me, but this woman wrote an amazing quote, and she said, when I talk about honesty, I talk about being willing to share stuff about yourself that makes you feel incredibly vulnerable and even very embarrassed. You see the difference? This kind of honesty is the key to God. The other one is bullshit, right? So as all of this is taking place, and now, and also what happens is your synchronicities start to change. prior to that, your synchronicities were locked into you keeping on a certain frequency. But now you're beginning to break out, you will get synchronicities where it's almost like God can actually start to communicate. Not necessarily the words, but He's able to start saying things by the events around you. But you're going to see a bit of a war go on, a bit of a battle, because what will happen is the A influences are going to try to trick you, and they'll sneak in and go, hey, I'm a B influence, dude. Yeah. And you'll fall for it. And the Father will allow this to happen because He foresees that one of the grandest things one must learn is discernment, spiritual discernment. Because when one's spiritual discernment is fully evolved, you don't notice that the capacity of man, not because he's, I'm a big man, but because he has something, a spark within him that is prized throughout the known and unknown universe. And when that spark is fully formed, because it's a micro of the Father, when it's fully formed, and I'm talking about discernment now, you can sit down with any God and know in an instant who He is, where He's from, and whether He's bullshit. That's what's so amazing about man. It almost seems like the whole universe conspires, because I don't know why we were given this gift. And I think most of the people on this planet don't even have it. But that's another information for another video. But this discernment. So all of this, what can then begin to happen? So if you can imagine, the sexual center is starting to go, it's starting to flutter and starting to help to open the higher centers. And the higher centers, when the higher centers start to open, they purify a man or woman. These higher centers turn the legion. Remember I talked about the million selves, and they all appear and disappear, and we're stupid, and I think it terrifies us. The idea we've got this legion of selves would make a lot of people collapse. So it's much better to deny it. But the Buddhists do talk about this. So as the higher centers activate, they purify and simplify. You go from legion to less and less, to ultimately the higher centers and your access becomes such a strong channel that you're a divinized man or woman, a man or woman who is awake. And what was I going to say? So what I do want to touch on, though, is, again, I'm really connected with a number of the Buddhist teachings, but there's things I fundamentally can't connect or agree with, because fundamentally the reason how I was able to wake up was doing sufficient work, so I was able to receive direct revelation. This may be just a concept to you, and that's okay. And I guess let this be a concept too, but direct revelation is on a whole different level. It is more real to you than everything that you can sense with your senses, if it's a real gnosis and you've done the work to allow for these revelations. That's how I'm able to speak to you without any script. So, what I'm saying is that let's talk about the self and the no-self. The big idea with Buddhism is that essentially, so what they've got right is the legion self. If you reflect and meditate closely, you'll notice that the self just keeps kind of rotating, and there's lots of them. The Buddhists take it a step further. Depending on what school that you kind of look into, they say no self. That's a lie. Bullshit. I'm not saying the Buddha he may have not even said that. I'm just saying, anyone who perpetuates that idea have not developed sufficiently. What I can testify by direct revelation is that it is not the negating of self, but the divinizing of self. In other words, balancing the senses, allowing the higher senses, and as they clear and more deeply purify, you will have a solid, divinized self. Now, how do I speak so strongly on this? Because I've directly experienced, as I said, my God is not a textbook. The Word of God is in man. You understand? You just need to know how to activate it. And when I have these direct experiences, I'm sorry, I don't care if the whole world thinks there's no self. As I said, when you're sufficiently developed, what is occurring within you is 1,000 times more true and real than anything the senses can perceive. Sorry, I'm getting a bit preachy. Sorry about that. I put my finger down. Yeah, look, so I think that's kind of, I'll leave it there. There's a lot of information in there. I guess what I wanted to touch a bit, I have a bit, but it's the honesty, and I guess I've sort of covered that. But all I'm trying to say is, if you want to, some of this is very advanced, right? But if you want a gateway, right, I'm going to give you, I call it a gateway is the one thing that's in your reality now that if taken far enough could lead you all the way. And one of those things is self-honesty. If you reach a self-honesty that's not this, hey, I'm honest because I like to tell people what I think. If you reach an honesty where you're willing to be vulnerable and admit things that make you feel a bit ashamed. If you're able to do that consistently, that is what I call a gateway that can lead you all the way. So I'm just giving you a little tip there. There's other gateways. I am going to leave it there, and I'll be back next week. And look, much love. As I said, it's amazing to be able to share this. It's amazing what's happened in my life, and I wish everyone well on their journey. I cannot compromise the truth, no matter how many people hate me. And in fact, what I'm doing, this work I'm doing, needs to be done. Because I said we're in a counterfeiting reality, and the YouTube and all of that is filled with counterfeiting. And I'll tell you one thing, what is a very common trick that one should always watch out for, and this covers the entire world of religion, is what I call the mix of honey and poison. Honey and poison. So what I mean to say, let's take the Bible for example. There are verses in there that anyone who's sold and developed or developed in will know that they are divine principles. And only a dark soul would not recognize that. Or an asleep soul would not recognize that. Yet in that same book, absolute poison, deadly, deadly poison. So the reason I say this is I'm giving you a little hint here that this is how we get tricked. Remember, I was a church minister for years, right? But it's the same with every single religion that I've checked out. You have these divine principles, and a good-hearted man or woman that goes, you know what, I feel it, man. How can you not feel that? And then poisons in you. Gotcha. That sums it all up, and this is why the kingdom of heaven is within. The word of God is inside a man, but he must work very, very hard, very honestly, because no one deserves this truth without sufficient work. That's what I love about this, man. This whole planet. Is there a soul on this planet that deserves to know the truth? Not really. I'm sorry. People don't deserve it. But I'm hoping that there's a handful out there. Anyway, look, I better go and relax. I've been up since 4 in the morning. I've been doing my music. It's now 10:30. But it's wonderful, actually, because I've actually done all my work and it's 10:30. How cool is that? So I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope this helps, and I hope you're enjoying this. I've got so much more to say. And have a lovely rest of the weekend, and much love. And I'd like to share with you whatever I can impart of my soul that would not disable me, that might help you in your journey. Okay. I'll speak to you soon.